The lists that were provided by both of the councillors are a very interesting example, because on Councillor Moscow's list, we have a number of people that end up donating a number of times to a number of candidates over and over again, to many, many candidates, not just in the $5,000 range, but upwards of $5, $7, $10, $20, $30, $40,000. And Councillor Moscow was kind enough to remind us, or I think maybe Councillor Fillion, of the famous day when somebody arrived with large checks and gave them to an assistant. And that was how business was done. And that wasn't a $5,000 donation, that was $15,000 or $20,000 or $25,000 donation. So this is, it's all about, as they say, follow the money. Well, when I follow the money here on who works with the city, and yes, business works with the city, unions work with the city, residents work with the city, but having the notion and the premise and the goal of one resident, one vote, one resident, one donation, I think is very important. And one resident, one donation to my campaign, to Councillor Moscow's campaign, Councillor Fillion's campaign, to the mayor's campaign, with a maximum of $5,000 is probably one of the most important things that we're overlooking here. Because we haven't said no union or no corporate, but the sky's the limit. You can, as an individual, perhaps on the list that Councillor Min Wong gave us, the president of Castle Point Realty has a lot of money that he could give 44 different donations of $750. But there's a cap now for the donations. And I think that's a really critical democratic piece. There is no blanket dollars that are out there. And you do have to work hard to get and raise your money. But there's not somebody there writing an individual check to each campaign because they can. There is a cap. And that is hand in hand with changing the union and corporate donation piece, one of the most important reforms that we're making here at this council, and I hope we will make that. I also just want to add, as other councillors have said, about the lobbyist registry. Councillors who've been and started this process, and we shouldn't forget, this just isn't this moment in time. This was started a long time ago. Well, 1837 it was really started. But it is started a long time ago, and Councillor Moscow and others with Mr. Naiman saying we have to curtail the fact that a lot of contributions are going here, and there appears to be a voting pattern with contributions, and that's wrong. And the flag that's been picked up and carried by other councillors is important. But the fact is, what we didn't have then and what we do have now is we have a lobbyist registry, where if there is a big issue, you are obliged, as is the lobbyist is obliged to say, I have visited Councillor Jenkins about such and such prior to that issue coming to council. That's a little more direct than I happened to give Councillor Jenkins some money in the election and now I'm kind of calling it in. We have transparency here with the lobbyist registry that we have never had before in this council. So these are a whole number of companion pieces around democratizing and making the council operations far more transparent. And I believe this is just one more step in the pathway to democracy and changing the ability of bankrolling your council. That's been ongoing for a large number of years, and democratizing the council by allowing everybody an equal chance. And I think that is actually the next place, is about the equal chance. And that whoever you are, a resident or non-resident within the city boundary, you should get to select your representative. And that the equal chance means that, yes, the complexion of this council would change, councillors, but not in the way perhaps Councillor Walker had referred to. There may be more women here. There may be more people of color here. We may be more reflective of the city itself. And that is the ongoing pathway of democracy.
Could I ask you to wrap up, Councillor?
Yes, part of a continuum. And I think it's an important part. And I just have one last announcement. With this piece of legislation, the sky is not falling. I don't think we need to worry about
Thank
our
you.
elections.
Perfectly poised to comment on that will be Councillor Kelly, the final speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll preface my remarks by indicating that 70% of my contributions came from individuals, and they are always the people that I approach first for their assistance in the electoral process. Mr. Mayor, I have read Professor McDermott's research, as well as his articles that have been published in the press, and I've listened very carefully to his acolytes this afternoon. And the essence of the argument, I think, is that corporate donations constitute an assault on democratic principles and or practice, and as a consequence, the business community exercises undue influence in the decision-making process of this city government. Those are serious allegations, and I had a number of graduate students in my office canvass the research in this field across North American universities and research institutions. And what comes back is a profile of an argument that deals in soft concepts. It will make democracy, quote, better. That it places a lot of emphasis on appearances, and all I can ask, or the only question that comes to mind with respect to the latter, is that I'm unwilling to accept the principle that all that glitters is gold. I would put it to you, Mr. Mayor, that Professor McDermott and those whose arguments and actions flow from his writings share a naive, shallow, and unproductive view of the democratic electoral process. If you take a look at the argument, that is, corporate participation in the electoral process, or its funding anyway, is an exercise of undue influence, I would ask you to check the record. Talk to the business community about the business-friendly atmosphere at City Hall, and all you'll hear is a litany of complaints. Take a look at a business tax rate that is 4 times the rate of the single-family residential taxpayer. How one could conclude that the business community exercises undue influence baffles both reason and the imagination. I believe that corporations are legitimately exercising influence because the decisions that we make influence their businesses. They have a legitimate right to support business-friendly councillors. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would put it to you that the business of a city is business. And once it ceases to be business, then that city ceases to be a viable place in which to live, work, and play. Mr. Mayor, I have a very strong appreciation for the law of unintended consequences. And I think that there are at least 6 unintended consequences that would flow from the banning of corporate and union donations. The first is that I think you'll see more wealthy or well-off candidates in the field, people who, like Rob Ford, for example, could afford to pay for their election out of their own pocket. And I'm not sure that that will be a more democratic trend in our